February 1st, 2012, Anchorage, Alaska, 8:17 in the evening. 18-year-old Samantha Koenig is working alone at Common Grounds Espresso, a small drive-through coffee kiosk on Two-Door Road. It's February in Alaska, dark and cold, the kind of cold that discourages lingering. Samantha is a barista. She has a boyfriend. She has plans. She is funny and bright and young in the way that 18-year-old girls are young, with all of life still arranged in front of her. A man approaches the kiosk on foot. He's wearing a hat, a hood, sunglasses. He's tall, 6'2", broad-shouldered, calm. He places an order. He waits for her to turn away from the window, and then he pulls a weapon. The surveillance footage captures it. The angle isn't perfect, but you can see what happens. You can see the moment the night becomes something else. You can see Samantha Koenig's entire future collapse into the next few hours. The man walks her to his white pickup truck parked across the street. They drive away. Common Grounds sits empty. The lights are still on. The espresso machine is still warm. Nobody knows anything is wrong yet. By the next morning, Samantha Koenig was dead. In her attacker's pocket, her debit card, her PIN, her phone, items he would carry across 5 states over the next 40 days, withdrawing her money at ATMs while wearing disguises, while she lay in a lake 35 miles north of the city. Items that would, in the end, be the only thing his entire system could not account for. The mistake was already in his pocket. He just didn't know it yet. Intent. It's what separates accident from murder, passion from premeditation, justice from revenge. I'm Carmen Carrion. This is Deadly Intent. Last week, we traced the origins of Israel Keyes, the childhood in a white supremacist militia church, the years of methodical planning, the kill caches buried across the country, the murders that went undetected for a decade. Today, we follow him to the end, the last crime, the last mistake, and the investigation that finally cracked a man who had spent his entire adult life making sure he could never be cracked. Let me tell you exactly what happened the night Israel Keyes took Samantha Koenig. Not the summary version, the full account, because she deserves to have her story told completely. And because every detail reveals something about the architecture of the man who did this. Keyes had spent time scouting coffee kiosks in Anchorage before settling on Common Grounds Espresso on Two-Door Road. He chose it deliberately because of its location tucked at the northeast corner of a parking lot, because a record snowfall that winter had built up walls of plowed snow that blocked the stand's north side from the view of anyone on Two-Door Road, and because it was open later than the other stands he had considered. He had never been a customer. He had never seen Samantha Koenig before. He assumed a young woman would be working alone at that hour. He was choosing the location. The human being inside was interchangeable. He prepared his truck the way he prepared everything, in advance, methodically. He removed the mounted toolboxes from the bed to create room. He took off the license plates. He carried a portable police scanner with an earpiece so he could monitor where patrol units were responding in real time. That night, the scanner told him officers were handling an emergency on the other side of the city. The path to the kiosk was clear. He approached Common Grounds just before closing time, wearing a ski mask. He ordered coffee. He waited. When Samantha turned away from the window, he came through. She ran. Samantha Koenig broke away from him the moment he entered, and she ran hard, toward Two-Door Road, toward the parking lot, toward any other human being. She was 18 years old, and she did not freeze. She fought. Keyes chased her across the lot, caught her, tackled her to the ground. He put one arm around her and pressed the gun against her body, and told her the ammunition was very quiet and that she should not do anything to make him use it. He told her to cooperate. He walked her across Two-Door Road into the parking lot between the IHOP and the Dairy Queen, where his white truck sat in the dark with its plates removed. He bound her inside the truck and drove away from the kiosk, with its lights still on and the espresso machine still warm. As he drove, he explained the situation to her. He told her it was a kidnapping for ransom. He said he needed money, that her family would raise it, and that she would be released when they paid. He asked for her debit card PIN. Samantha told him her family didn't have much money. She tried to reason with him, to lower her perceived value, to find any angle that might change the outcome. Keyes listened and kept driving. He drove to a nearby ATM and tested the PIN she had given him. It worked. While he was there, Samantha's boyfriend, who had gone to check on her when she didn't come home, arrived in the area and confronted Keyes directly. Keyes ran back to the truck and left before anything could come of it. He drove Samantha Koenig to his home in the Turn-Again neighborhood of Anchorage, the house where his girlfriend and his 10-year-old daughter lived. He brought Samantha to the shed on the property and locked her inside. He took her cell phone. He took her debit card. He went back into the house. He sent a text from Samantha's phone to her boyfriend, making it appear she was fine. Later that night, he returned to the shed. He sexually assaulted her. He left her restrained in the shed and went back to the house. Early the morning of February 2nd, he returned to the shed a second time. He sexually assaulted her again. Then he strangled her with a rope. Samantha Koenig was 18 years old. She died in a shed 40 feet from where his daughter was sleeping. He left her body there. He went inside. He woke his daughter. He packed his bags. That morning, Israel Keyes boarded a plane at Ted Stevens Anchorage International Airport. He flew to New Orleans, where his girlfriend joined him the following day. Together, they boarded a cruise ship and spent 2 weeks on the water. The Gulf of Mexico, ports of call, dinners on the trip, the whole thing. The cruise had been booked in advance. He had scheduled everything else around it. For 16 days, Samantha Koenig's body lay in the shed behind the house, while Anchorage searched for her. Her boyfriend reported her missing. Her father went to the media. The reward climbed towards $70,000. Her face was on posters all over the city. The espresso stand sat dark with the lights still on. Keyes returned to Anchorage on February 17th. He needed to establish the fiction that Samantha was still alive, a proof of life that would allow him to access her account without immediately triggering the monitoring he knew was in place. He went to the shed. He staged a photograph of her body to appear as though she was alive, holding a copy of the Anchorage Daily News dated February 13th, 13 days after she was already dead. He purchased a manual typewriter so there would be no printer metadata to trace, and typed a ransom demand for $30,000. He drove to Connors Bog Park and placed the note and photo beneath a memorial flyer posted for a neighborhood dog named Albert. Then he texted her boyfriend from Samantha's own phone. The note was under Albert. Anchorage police recovered the note. Samantha's father, James Koenig, with donations pouring in from the community, deposited reward money into the account linked to her debit card. The ransom demand was paid. It was a trap. Investigators were watching every transaction on that account, waiting for the card to be used. In the days after staging the proof of life, Keyes dismembered Samantha Koenig's body. He drove 30 miles north of Anchorage to Matanuska Lake. Over 3 separate trips, he drilled holes through the ice and lowered parts of her body into the water, tied with baling wire and waited so they would sink. He told investigators about this later in the calm, procedural way he described everything. Assistant U.S. Attorney Frank Russo, one of the lead prosecutors, whether he had caught any fish while he was out on the ice at Matanuska Lake. Keyes said yes. Russo asked what he did with them. Keyes said he took them home and ate them. Russo later said that answer turned his stomach in a way that almost nothing else in the entire case had. Then Keyes left Alaska. He drove south in a rented Kia Soul, covering 2,847 miles over 5 days. As he moved through Texas, Louisiana, and the Gulf Coast, he began making withdrawals from Samantha's debit account at ATMs, wearing hats, hoods, sunglasses, and face coverings in front of every camera. He withdrew in amounts calibrated to avoid immediate flags. He stayed in motion. But investigators had the account locked and loaded. Every transaction generated a real-time location alert. The FBI notified law enforcement across Texas, Louisiana, and Arkansas. They were looking for a rental car matching specific plate characteristics. On March 11, Keyes attended his younger sister's wedding in East Texas. A Church of Wales elder confronted him publicly at the ceremony for being an atheist. Keyes raged against God loudly enough to collapse the wedding. 2 days later, on March 13, Texas Highway Patrol Corporal Brian Henry spotted a Ford Focus near Lufkin, Texas, going slightly over the speed limit. He followed it into the parking lot of the Cotton Patch restaurant. He ran the plates. The alert fired. When officers searched the vehicle, they found cash stained with dye from a bank robbery. They found Samantha Koenig's ID, her debit card, her cell phone, and a gun. They found the disguise. Everything was there. Israel Keyes was arrested in that parking lot, 4,500 miles from Anchorage, 6 weeks after the night he had walked up to a coffee stand with a ski mask and a scanner and a plan. On April 2, 2012, FBI dive teams spent 10 hours in Matanuska Lake. They recovered Samantha Koenig's remains. Frank Russo was the one who made the calls to her parents. He described it simply as a bad day, the worst kind. Samantha Koenig loved animals and music and photography. She had talked about becoming a Navy nurse. She was working a closing shift, alone, doing her job, on a February night in Alaska. When Keyes came through that window, she didn't freeze. She ran. She fought hard enough that he had to physically chase her down. She tried everything she could think of to survive and to leave a trail. The pin she gave him, the text her boyfriend received, the account that investigators were watching. The trail she created is what brought him down. She is the reason he was caught. In November 2013, more than a year after Keyes had died in his cell, the FBI made a public announcement that added a fourth name to the known victims list, or as close to a fourth name as they could get. Deborah J. Feldman was 48 years old when she was last seen at her apartment in Hackensack, New Jersey, on April 8, 2009. She was 5 feet 1 inch tall. She weighed around 112 pounds. She had blonde hair. She had a son named Matthew, who was in his early 20s when his mother disappeared, and who would spend years not knowing what had happened to her. Matthew Feldman told the Star-Ledger of Newark that he had believed for a long time that his mother might be in a witness protection program. He had held on to that story because the alternative was something he wasn't ready to consider. When the FBI finally reached out to him, it wasn't with the full truth. It was with the FBI's careful, conditional language. His mother may have been a victim of Israel Keyes. The investigation was ongoing. Her body had not been recovered. He should contact Hackensack police if he had any information about her activities around the time of her disappearance. Not a confirmed answer. A maybe. After 4 years. Here's what the FBI knows. On April 1, 2009, Israel Keyes flew from Anchorage to Seattle. On April 7th, he flew to Manchester, New Hampshire. He rented a vehicle. He put 1,047 miles on it over the following days. He checked into a hotel in Essex, Vermont for 2 nights, the same Essex, Vermont, where he would return 2 years later to kill Bill and Lorraine Currier. Essex is a 3.5-hour drive from Hackensack, New Jersey. During the interrogation sessions, investigators showed Keyes photographs of missing persons whose disappearances overlapped with his documented travel. When they showed him a photograph of Deborah Feldman, he did not react the way he reacted to people he didn't recognize. He went quiet. He stared at the photograph, and then he said, "I'm not ready to talk about that one yet." But there was more than the photograph. When the investigators searched Keyes' computer after his arrest, they found that he had searched for Deborah Feldman's name. He had looked her up. That is not the behavior of a man with no connection to a missing woman. That is the behavior of a man who wanted to know whether she had been found. Not, "I don't know her." Not, "That's not someone I've ever seen." "I'm not ready to talk about that one yet." It was a statement of ownership, a deliberate withholding, the language of a man who was rationing information for strategic reasons. He also admitted in those sessions that on April 9, 2009, The day after Deborah Feldman was last seen alive, he abducted a woman from a state on the East Coast. He said he transported her across multiple state lines into New York. He said he killed her. He said he buried her in upstate New York near Tupper Lake. April 8th, Deborah Feldman vanishes from Hackensack. April 9th, Keyes abducts a woman from the East Coast. The FBI believes they are the same event. Her body has never been found. Her bank accounts were never used after she disappeared. The Keyes investigation team believes she is buried somewhere in the Tupper Lake region of upstate New York, several hours north of the city. That area was searched. Nothing was recovered. Deborah Feldman had struggled with long-term drug problems, according to her son. She was the kind of person the system doesn't always work hard to find, not because she didn't matter, but because the mechanisms designed to locate missing people were not built equally for everyone. Keyes knew this. The FBI acknowledged it carefully and without naming names. He chose victims, they said, who were less likely to generate immediate media attention, who might not be missed quickly, who moved through the margins of visibility. She was a mother. She had a son who spent years inventing hopeful stories to explain her absence, because the true explanation was too terrible. She deserves her name said out loud. She deserves to be counted. Israel Keyes knew he was caught. He knew the Koenig evidence was overwhelming. He knew the debit card withdrawals had been captured on camera. He knew investigators had found things on his computer. So he made a decision, in his typically calculated way, about how to proceed. He would talk, but he would control what he said, when he said it, and what it cost to hear it. He initially demanded a speedy trial, a death sentence, and the assurance that the execution would be carried out within a year. He was not negotiating from emotion. He was negotiating from strategy. He did not want to spend the rest of his life in a cage, surrounded by the kind of true crime coverage he found embarrassing and beneath him. He had, after all, deliberately kept his crimes out of the news for a decade. The idea of becoming a media story was genuinely offensive to him. He told investigators, "Once I started, there was nothing else like it." And when asked why he chose his victims, he responded, "I didn't." He wasn't being evasive. He meant it literally. He didn't choose people. He chose places, windows of operational opportunity, and let whatever human being happened to be there become the victim. The distinction mattered to him enormously. He wasn't driven by hatred of specific individuals or attraction to specific types. He was driven by the act itself. The rush he described, the adrenaline of complete power over another person's existence. At one point, an investigator tried a different angle. They asked him what it felt like, not the act itself, but the planning, the anticipation, whether the buildup was part of it. Keyes paused. Then he said that the planning was its own thing, that the urge would come over him and he would start working through the logistics, and there was a satisfaction in that process entirely separate from anything that followed. He described it the way someone might describe the pleasure of organizing a complicated project. The lists, the contingencies, the problem solving. He spoke about it with the same animated energy he brought to discussing construction work. Enthusiastic, technical, proud of the craft. FBI agent Jolene Godin spent more time with Keyes in those rooms than almost anyone. She and her colleagues had decades of combined experience. They had sat across from murderers, rapists, terrorists. The thing that unnerved them about Keyes was not the violence. It was the absence of any register in which the violence felt like violence to him. Godin watched him eat bagels, drink coffee, and describe murder with the same energy you'd bring to a favorite hobby. In one session, he noticed she'd seemed tired and asked if she was getting enough sleep, genuinely, with apparent concern. She said later it was one of the most disorienting moments of the entire investigation, being asked after by a man who had just spent 2 hours describing how he disposed of a body in a lake. He described the Courier murders with the most detail, apparently more at ease discussing crimes with no immediate charging implications than speaking about Koenig, which carried active prosecution. He told them about the cigar in the backyard. He told them about forgetting the shell casings. These were the details that bothered him. Not the bodies, not the violence, but the procedural imperfections. He was annoyed at himself for those lapses, the way a craftsman is annoyed by a measurement that came out a quarter inch off. What the transcripts also reveal is that the cooperation between Keyes and investigators was never smooth. It was fractious, strategic, and at times openly hostile. Keyes was genuinely furious about what happened after he gave investigators the location of the Vermont farmhouse. He had told them specifically, before disclosing anything, that he didn't want local Vermont authorities involved. What he got instead was what he called a big freaking archaeological dig right alongside a main road. Local police, state investigator, coverage that began making its way into the press. He told Russo in one session, "I told you from the get-go. Before I told you where the freaking bodies were left, I told you that I didn't want the locals involved, and the first thing you did is make a big scene." Russo's response was essentially, "You're right, but politically we had no choice." It's a rare window into the impossible position both sides were in. Investigators trying to manage a cooperation deal with a man who had more leverage than almost anyone they'd ever dealt with, and a killer who understood exactly how much leverage he had and was furious every time it slipped. One of the more disorienting aspects of those sessions, captured in the transcripts, is how ordinary they could sound. At one point, Keyes mentioned offhandedly that the jail had put him on pencil restriction. Bell responded without missing a beat that it was probably to stop him from eating pencils. Keyes laughed. The agents laughed. And then they went back to discussing the number of people he had killed and where he had buried them. That is the texture of those rooms. Not the dramatic, cinematic confrontation you might expect. Coffee, bagels, jokes about pencils, and in between, a man calmly accounting for the architecture of multiple murders. When they pushed him on names, on the unidentified victims, he retreated. He said things like, "I want to help you with that, but I need something first." The something was always the same: his execution date, a firm commitment, a timeline. Prison was the terror. Death was the desired outcome. There is no one who knows me, or has ever known me, that knows anything about me, really. He told them during one session, "I'm two different people, basically." He was not wrong about that. Agent Godin described her interview sessions as requiring constant vigilance. She said, "I never got the sense that he accidentally told us something, or got angry and something flew out of his mouth. My impression was that he always knew what he was going to give us. He was performing the interviews the same way he had performed his entire life. Everything calculated, everything rationed. Even his confessions were strategic." What the transcripts make clear, more precisely than any second-hand account, is what specifically Keyes was trying to keep quiet. It wasn't abstract. He named it. In one session, he told investigators that different things that were done with the bodies and the sexual assault stuff were what he could not allow to become public. He said if those details came out, nothing else they negotiated would matter. He would walk away from the cooperation entirely. This was not a man protecting his legacy in any conventional sense. He was protecting specific acts, things he had done that even he understood existed in a different category. The man who calmly discussed murder methodology over coffee had a line. It just wasn't where any decent person's line would be. At one point, Russo told him, not entirely without edge, that if they wanted to, they could simply go ahead and make him look like the villain he was. Keyes didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He laughed and said, "I'm already a villain." Just like that. No defensiveness. No self-pity. No attempt to reframe or minimize. He said it the way someone might acknowledge the weather. And then the conversation moved on, because there was nothing left to say about it. And when asked whether the searches for victims were a burden on taxpayers, when an interviewer tried to get a reaction from him about the cost of the ongoing investigation, Keyes laughed. He said, "Almost feel guilty. It's costing the taxpayers a lot of time and money. Should have just kept my mouth shut." He wasn't expressing remorse. He was performing mild amusement at the inconvenience he was causing. Near the end of one particularly long session, after Russo had spent considerable time explaining the bureaucratic complications of getting multiple jurisdictions to agree on anything, Keyes leaned back and said, "Starting to think I'm more efficient than the government." Russo didn't really argue with him. He said Keyes was certainly good at planning. Bell agreed. And they were right. For 10 years, across dozens of trips, across multiple states, Israel Keyes had run an operation that no government agency had managed to detect, track, or interrupt. A Texas Highway Patrol corporal going 41 in a 40 zone is the only reason we're having this conversation at all. The FBI officially confirmed 3 murder victims during his lifetime: Samantha Koenig, Bill Courier, and Lorraine Courier. A 4th, Deborah Feldman, is believed with high confidence but has not been officially confirmed in the same way because Keyes died before completing that disclosure. And here is something worth pausing on. The number 11, the skulls, the victims, that didn't come from Keyes boasting. It came from the FBI's own team. Officer Jeff Bell said it directly in one of the recorded sessions. They know that there's potentially up to 10 or 11 victims, so there's 7 or 8 that we don't know where they're at. Law enforcement's own internal working number, not a negotiating tactic, not speculation, a count the people investigating him believed, based on everything he had already told them and everything they had already confirmed. He told investigators about killings in Washington state, at least 4, he said. An unidentified couple killed sometime between July 2001 and 2005. 2 additional murders between 2005 and 2006, at least one of which involved a body disposed of from a boat into Lake Crescent, a glacially carved lake in Olympic National Park, west of Port Angeles. The lake drops to over 600 feet in places. He weighted the body and sank it. It has never been found. He hinted at crimes in Texas. He hinted at crimes during his Army service that the official record could not account for. When investigators showed him photographs of missing persons whose disappearances coincided with his travel, some he dismissed, others he went quiet over. He had the photographs and the files and the faces, and he sat there and weighed each one and decided which ones to answer. The FBI's position is that the 11 skulls represent 11 victims, 3 confirmed, 4 believed, 4 entirely unknown. 4 people whose names, faces, and stories have never been publicly connected to Israel Keyes, who may appear in cold case files in Washington, Oregon, New York, or states Keyes never specified, who are still out there, in the ground somewhere, or underwater somewhere, still waiting. The FBI released Keyes' travel timeline publicly in 2013, with interactive maps of his own movements from 1997 through 2012. They released video footage of his interrogations. They released evidence photos of the recovered Blake Falls cache, all of it designed to prompt memory. Someone who was at a campground, someone who saw a man at a trailhead who didn't belong, someone who remembers a disappearance from their community that was never explained. 2 specific locations have emerged from that travel record that the FBI considers significant. In 2007, Keyes rented a single-person kayak in Healdsburg, California, a small city in Sonoma County, north of San Francisco, where the Russian River runs through wine country. He had no known reason to be there. The FBI suspects remains may be located in that area. In a separate incident, Keyes buried cash near Green River, Wyoming. Investigators believe that location may also be connected to a victim. Neither site has yielded confirmed remains. Both remain active areas of interest. The FBI's explicit instruction stands. If any member of the public finds what happens to be a buried watertight container in a remote location, do not touch it. Call 1-800-CALL-FBI. Because evidence in those containers may be the only remaining physical link to victims whose cases have never been connected to anyone. We are more than a decade past his death, and there are buckets in the American wilderness, in national parks, near reservoir trailheads, under decades of leaf cover and packed soil, that contain evidence of murders that have never been solved. That is not a metaphor. That is a statement of fact from the FBI. Most serial offenders escalate over time, more frequent, more reckless, the compulsion overtaking the caution. Keyes did the opposite. He had long, dormant periods between crimes, sometimes years. His civilian life showed no degradation, no behavioral warning signs. His girlfriend noticed nothing. His clients noticed nothing. His neighbors noticed nothing. For him, killing was not a pressure valve. It was a scheduled event, planned, executed, filed away. Life resumed exactly where it had been. His relationship to fame was unlike almost every other serial killer on record. BTK sent letters. The Zodiac sent ciphers. Keyes actively despised notoriety. He chose random victims specifically so no pattern would ever generate a headline. He was contemptuous of true crime culture. His primary concern when he was caught, the thing that genuinely disturbed him, was the possibility of media attention reaching his daughter. But the transcripts complicate that. In one session, negotiating over which details would stay sealed, he said, "From an entertainment's perspective, from my perspective, yeah, it would really be fun to have this stuff come out." He caught himself, pulled back, said he didn't want to give his mother a heart attack. But the impulse was there. Part of him wanted to be known. He just wanted it on his own terms. He never got that, and in its own small way, that was one more thing that defeated him. He read Mindhunter as a teenager and used it as a manual. He cataloged every mistake made by killers who got caught. The BTK floppy disk, Ridgway's DNA, Yates burying a victim in his own yard, and engineered his system to answer every one. The credit card was the one crack in his architecture. For 10 years before the crack appeared, the system held. Before we get to how this ended, I want to stop and hold space for the people this case is actually about. Not the methodology, not the psychology, the people. Samantha Koenig was 18 years old. She loved animals and music and photography. She had talked about joining the Navy to become a nurse. She was funny and warm and full of energy, the kind of person who makes a room feel more alive. When Keyes came through that window, she ran. She fought hard enough that he had to physically chase her across the parking lot. She tried everything she could think of to survive. The trail she left, the pin, the account, the ATM cameras, is the reason he was caught. She is the reason we are all here. William Scott Currier was 50 years old. He worked in information technology. He had moved to Essex Junction, Vermont with Lorraine, and they had built a quiet, contented life there. A home with a backyard pool. They opened to neighborhood kids in the summer. A Christmas tradition. Bird feeders out back. His co-workers described him as showing up first, leaving last. The kind of employee who was quietly dependable. On the night of June 8, 2011, when the man with the headlamp came through the bedroom window and bound him with zip ties, Bill Currier never stopped asking where his wife was. Not when he was locked in a basement, not when he partially freed himself. He kept calling for Lorraine until the moment he could not anymore. Lorraine Simone Currier was 55 years old. She was an animal hospital technician. She had worked at the same medical practice long enough that her absence was noticed immediately. She loved the animals in her care. She and Bill had been together long enough that the neighbors saw them as a unit. The Curriers. Homebodies. Good people. The kind of people who just are the neighborhood without making a production of it. When she was thrown into the back seat of their own car and driven away in the night, she found a way to get her hands free. She ran down Route 15. It was just after midnight, early June. The Vermont night just warm enough. that there would have been no reason for windows to be closed. Route 15 was 3 miles from their home, a 2-lane state highway running east-west through Essex, with streetlights and the occasional car even at that hour. She was running across a gravel lot toward the road. She could see it, the farmhouse close enough to the highway that a person sprinting hard might cover the distance in under a minute. She was close enough that if a single pair of headlights had appeared at the right moment, everything might have been different. No headlights appeared. Keys caught her before she reached the road. She got close enough that it still matters, close enough that anyone who drives Route 15 through Essex, Vermont today is driving the road she was running toward. Bill and Lorraine Currier have never been recovered. Their remains are believed to be in a landfill somewhere in Vermont. The community tied yellow ribbons to the tree in their front yard for 10 months before the FBI called Vermont State Police to say a man in an Alaskan jail had confessed. Vermont State Police investigator Lance Burnham, who worked their case from the beginning, said years later it had never left him. Deborah J. Feldman was 48 or 49 years old, depending on whether she had already celebrated her birthday when she disappeared from her Hackensack apartment on April 8, 2009. She was 5 feet 1 inch tall. She had blonde hair. She had a son named Matthew, who spent years inventing hopeful explanations for her absence. When he was finally contacted by the FBI in 2013, it was not with answers. It was with a conditional statement. His mother may have been a victim of Israel Keys. Her body has not been recovered. The investigation is ongoing. Please call this number if you have any information. Deborah Feldman deserves her name said out loud. She was a mother. She was a person. She was chosen because she was in the wrong place, moving through the world in a way that made her more vulnerable to being selected and less likely to generate immediate attention when she was gone. That is a systematic failure as much as it is a personal tragedy. She should be counted. And then there are the ones we do not have names for. The FBI's own investigators put the number at 10 or 11 total victims, 3 confirmed, 4 believed with high confidence, which means there are 4, maybe 5 people whose names Israel Keys carried with him out of the world. Families somewhere in this country, maybe in Washington State, maybe in New York, maybe in Oregon or Texas or somewhere Keys never specified, who have been living for 15 or 20 years inside a missing persons case that was never solved. If you are one of those families, or if you know someone who might be, if a name or a face or a timeline in this episode has triggered something, please call 1-800-CALL-FBI. The investigation is still open. It will remain open. Agent Jolene Godin said this publicly, on the record, and it's the truest thing anyone connected to this case ever said. This case is about them and their lives, and the lives that they have not been able to live, and the families who no longer have them there. That's what this case is about. It's not about him. I try not to focus on him. I try to, but you can't understand what happened to Samantha, to Bill and Lorraine, to Deborah, to the 7 without understanding him. So we go there every time, and then we come back to them. Let me tell you what happened on the last night of Israel Keys' life, because the details matter here too. By late November 2012, Keys' negotiations were going nowhere. His trial was scheduled to begin March 2013. He had been told repeatedly and clearly that a deal for the death penalty timeline he wanted was not going to come together the way he had envisioned. The prosecutors were not prepared to move at his pace. The system was not going to bend to his demands. He was incarcerated at the Anchorage Correctional Complex in solitary confinement. He had been in custody for 9 months. He had spent those months in those interrogation rooms, talking and not talking, giving and withholding, constructing the careful architecture of what he would and would not say. He had given them enough to confirm the Currier murders. He had given them enough to connect him to the Koenig murder beyond any legal doubt. He had given them fragments, a body here, a location there, a photograph he went quiet over, and they had been unable to assemble the complete picture. And now the clock was wrong. On December 1st, 2012, at some point during the night, Israel Keyes used a razor blade he had managed to conceal. Investigators were never fully certain how. To open a vein in his wrist, he fashioned a ligature from his own bedding, wrapped it around his neck, and strangled himself. The two methods combined ensured he would not be found alive. When corrections staff found him, he was already gone. He was 34 years old. In his cell, beneath his body, they found a 4-page note written on a yellow legal pad. The note was heavily blood-soaked and illegible on the surface. It was sent to the FBI laboratory in Quantico, Virginia for processing and recovery. When technicians finally reconstructed the writing, what they found was, by all investigative accounts, a set of rants, disconnected, angry, full of the same contempt he had shown throughout his interrogations. No apology, no remorse, no final disclosure, no coordinates, no names, no last-minute map to the people he had hidden from the world. He had decided the investigation was over, and he ended it, on his schedule, on his terms. But that's not all they found. Under his bed, 11 skulls, drawn in his own blood. On the surface beneath where he slept, each one carefully rendered, each one bearing an inverted cross, a symbol of Satanism, of inversion, of contempt for the divine. And beneath one of the drawings, 3 words: "We are one." Think about the deliberateness of that. He was dying. He was bleeding. He was strangling himself with bedding. And in whatever time he had before his body gave out, he chose to crawl beneath his bed and draw 11 skulls in blood. He could have written names. He could have written locations. He could have given the FBI the answers that would have given 11 families some measure of resolution. He drew skulls instead. Anchorage Police Department Task Force Officer Jeff Bell, who had spent months in those interrogation rooms with him, looked at the drawings and said this: "I believe this signifies Satan and Israel Keyes, and the upside-down crucifixes on his 11 victims indicate that these are his, and these stories and souls belong to him." It was a final act of possession, a final assertion of ownership over the people he had taken. He couldn't keep them from being found. Samantha Koenig had been recovered from the lake. The courier's story had been told. Deborah Feldman's family had been notified. But the ones he had never named, the ones he had held back for leverage, the ones he had refused to disclose even when investigators spent months building rapport and offering concessions, those he took with him. He crawled under his bed in blood and walked out of the world with their names. We are one. That is what he believed, that the people he had killed belonged to him, that they were his, that in ending them he had absorbed something, their life force, their remaining years, the weight of their futures, and that he and they were unified in his act of ending them. Israel Keyes was wrong about that. He was wrong about it in the most important way possible. Those 11 people were not his. They were not one with him. They were separate human beings with separate lives and separate people who loved them. And they mattered before he ever touched them. And they matter more now that we say their names, not his. Samantha Koenig, William Scott Currier, Lorraine Simone Currier, Deborah J. Feldman, and 7 others, still unnamed, still out there somewhere. The investigation is still open. It will remain open. Israel Keyes died on his own schedule. He controlled the ending. What he did not control, what he could not control, was what came after. The FBI agents who kept working, the interrogation tapes made public, the travel timeline released with interactive maps, the skull drawings photographed and documented. Every piece of it available now for researchers and families and anyone who needs to find something. He despised true crime. He found the entire enterprise embarrassing and beneath him. He chose random victims specifically so no pattern would ever generate a headline. He wanted to dissolve completely. He nearly succeeded. The investigation is still open. The tip line is still active. Somewhere in this country, there are families who have been living inside an unanswered question for 15 or 20 years. If a name or place or a timeline in these 2 episodes has triggered something, anything, call 1-800-CALL-FBI. Israel Keyes wanted to be a ghost. The only way to fight a ghost is to make noise. Samantha Koenig, William Scott Currier, Lorraine Simone Currier, Deborah J. Feldman, and the others, still unnamed, still waiting. We say their names. We don't stop. Intent. It's what separates accident from murder, passion from premeditation, justice from revenge. Intent doesn't lie. People do. I'm Carmen Carrion. This has been Deadly Intent. Thank you for listening. Before I let you go, next time on Deadly Intent, we're traveling to the hills outside Florence, Italy. A quiet countryside, young couples parked beneath the trees, and a killer who seemed to be watching from the dark. Between 1968 and 1985, a series of brutal murders terrified the region. Lovers were shot in their cars, and the crime scenes revealed something even more disturbing: ritualistic mutilation that suggested the killer wasn't just committing murder. He was acting out something deeply symbolic. Investigators chased suspects for years. One man was even convicted before the case unraveled again in a storm of controversy. And to this day, many believe the true identity of the killer was never discovered. They called him the Monster of Florence, and the psychology behind these crimes may be one of the darkest puzzles in modern criminal history. Intent. Did he have it? Or are we looking for something far more complicated? Next time, we find out. Deadly Intent, next week. If you enjoy the psychology behind these cases, follow Deadly Intent on Spotify or Apple Podcasts so you never miss an episode. And if you're listening on Apple, leaving a quick review really helps the show grow.